Welcome to BYJU'S IAS. We are back again with our weekly review of international affairs, and this time we are going to have a close look at a country which was considered to be a major power in the 19th and the major part of 20th century, the Great Britain. It had an empire about which it was said the sun never sets on it. But right now Britain seems to be in a very different position, especially after the Brexit. There are several issues which people are apprehensive about. How will Britain fare after the Brexit? What will be the impact of the Britain's exit on the EU? How would it affect on the Anglosphere, the Atlantic Alliance, and of course what is known as the Commonwealth countries, which with Britain has had a very close ties. We shall cover all this and a little more. We shall also have a close look at the European Union, which appears to be in a state of disarray at the moment. So what are we waiting for? Let's start. Britain had for a long time resisted becoming a member of the European Union, and it was one of the Eurosceptics, the opponent of European Union, Margaret Thatcher, who finally decided to join European Union. Now, she thought at that stage that it would be a mutually beneficial relationship. Britain was confident, Britain was the leader at that stage in the international affairs, and she thought that there would be no compromise made on Britain's sovereignty if it joined European Union. Much water has flown since then in Thames and other European rivers. Britain finally decided after 47 years of membership to walk out of European Union. This is what is called Brexit, is walking out of European Union. And now the arguments are very complex. Britain tried to reclaim its sovereignty. Britain was very upset, especially ever since Boris Johnson took over the prime ministership, that Britain was being manipulated by its European partners, and they were trying to burden it with refugees. They were not giving it a fair deal. It was losing out in fisheries. Although Britain continues to have a trade with the European Union, which is larger than any other bloc of nations, it somehow was not very happy. At the same time, European Union did not have too many problems with Britain, but they did have a grouse that Britain was not always enthusiastic about picking up its share of either expenses or taking decisions jointly in context of managing peace elsewhere in the world, or having a joint foreign policy kind of an approach towards the rest of the world. Britain always has felt closer to English-speaking countries, the partner across Atlantic Ocean, the United States of America, what is now loosely termed as Anglosphere, as Canada, as countries of Commonwealth, and countries which had once had ties of empire with Great Britain. Now, Britain somehow or other thinks that it is the senior partner in any alliance system. Now, EU is not exactly a military alliance system, it is not even an alliance system. It started off as a common market, it started off as a cooperative common market, and then it slowly progressed to increase its membership, increase its clout. And at one stage, when Britain had joined it, it formed a group of nations which had command of vast resources in economy, technology, strategic capability, were permanent members of the Security Council exercising veto rights. So one could logically imagine that if there was harmonious cooperation between them, they would of course exercise as significant an influence on international relations as the two other superpowers, United States of America and erstwhile Soviet Union and its successor state Russia. Also, the emerging China had not quite assumed the economic clout which it has at the moment. At the moment, the Brexit becomes particularly problematic because one has to worry about that if Britain, it has actually moved out, but there is an ambiguous state that Britain continues to argue that although the no-deal Brexit was avoided and a deal was struck at the last minute by the end of the year, Britain believes that there would be a grace period of at least 6 months, and then it can probably be extended. European Union is very, very determined on making it very clear that this 6 months grace period is not going to be extended under any circumstances. It gave an honourable exit to Britain by having some kind of a deal before the year was out. But the problem is that any number of promises which Boris Johnson made to his countrymen have started sounding very hollow at the moment. He said that there would be no impact on Britain's economy. Britain would regain its freedom of action and its sovereignty. Britain would balance the loss of economic growth it had with trade with European Union by shifting his trade to the United States of America and other countries. And of course, it was said that during the grace period, there would be no restrictions. Trade would flow, commodities would flow between the European Union and Great Britain as they did in past. But very soon it became clear that although there would be no tariffs, no taxes, no custom fees on products, the sheer paperwork would delay processes so much that there would be lorries creating a traffic jam at Calais, there would be problems about fresh food stuff, fish, etc. being rotting while they are waiting for clearances, there would be checks, there would not be tariffs, but this loss in terms of time, in terms of paperwork, in terms of people not knowing what is to be done, what is not to be done, there was a lot of confusion. So it would add to, economists calculated, to equivalent of a tax of close to 8 to 9% on whatever was happening. The second disappointment was that the British fishermen was very upset. They thought that they would get a freedom to fish in the waters of European Union, and it suddenly turned out that the Europeans were being very protectionist about their fisheries. It is understandable because President Macron of France faces an election in a year and a half's time, and he cannot afford to make concessions to British fishermen, which put him at a vulnerable spot. Again, the other problem was the Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland had made it very clear from the beginning that it would like to continue the convenience of being a member of the European Union. Now, it has also a very interesting relationship after the Good Friday Agreement years ago with the Irish Republic, that there is no customs barrier between these two separated parts of Ireland, and Ireland, of course, had no such barriers with Great Britain as long as the Brexit had not taken place. Now, suddenly there was all kinds of complicated schemes about an Irish backstop, there would be no checks, etc. But recently a very ugly controversy where the countries of European Union blundered badly when they said that the AstraZeneca vaccine about pandemic of COVID-19 would not be exported from European manufacturing plants to any other country till the needs of Europe were met. This immediately raised eyebrows, and the Northern Ireland thought and the Irish Republic thought that they were being cheated out of this. If the vaccine goes to Irish Republic and there is no barrier between Irish Republic of Ireland and the Northern Ireland, then how do you stop from Northern Ireland these vaccines not going to Britain, who is not a member of the EU at the moment? At the same time, the Northern Ireland was very happy adopting regulation about food stuff, about pharmaceuticals, which the European Union was imposing on its member states. They are stricter than what Boris Johnson is inclined to follow in exercise of sovereignty of Great Britain in the United Kingdom. So there was this bottleneck. There was the Irish bottleneck, there was the Irish backstop confusion, then there was similar resentment in Wales and Scotland, the two other constituent units besides Northern Ireland of the United Kingdom. So experts have been speculating that if this continues, if Boris Johnson cannot provide immediate solutions or remedies to these problems, these two constituent units might opt out of the United Kingdom. So what would remain of the greatness of Britain? Would it be able to call itself Great Britain? Now, there are various other interesting things. The British Trade Secretary has come out with a very interesting statement when he stated that let's not worry about these hiccups which are bound to follow in the next couple of years. Let's look at Brexit in a 10-year vision. In 10 years, everything would be all right. Nobody is going to accept this with a large dose of salt because the British economy has been reeling under the impact of COVID. It was in a tailspin even before COVID hit Britain, but COVID has resulted in a shrinking of close to 10% of the British economy. And although it has registered a minor growth in the last quarter of the last year, but the cumulative effect of COVID has been disastrous for United Kingdom. It has been very bad for other countries in the world, but Britain among the developed countries seems to be the worst hit. It also is the worst hit in terms of the ratio between the fatalities and the infection and the size of the population. America has suffered much more, but then if you balance the size and scale, Britain seems to have done very badly. and no sense of direction or policy in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's actions. Either he imposed a lockdown or he tried to poo-poo it, and he himself suffered from an infection, had a very narrow escape, but then he again resumed his ways, and people believe that by temperament he is a bluffer, he is economical with truth, he tries to take a long shot gambles, and these long odd bets may pay, may not pay off. So they said that he would be prepared to do any kind of a moral, immoral decision making, subvert the authority of the parliament, keep the queen in the dark, and do what he wanted to do. He appointed his special advisors like Dominic Cummings, who were not responsible to the parliament, who had no authority to order civil servants, but and he, of course, Dominic Cummings, became controversial by flouting the COVID lockdown rules when he was still a part of the number 10 Downing Street. Now, there have been conflicts of interest. There has been a failure to manage the COVID crisis. The vaccines have started rolling out now, but the failure of the present government to look after the National Health Service, that's not there. The major flaws of decision making about education, where primary school kids have suffered, secondary school kids have suffered, the higher education is in a very sorry space. And the other thing which should not be forgotten is that how do we look at a rosy picture 10 years down the road when the present government seems to have floundered and failed at each step everywhere. Britain cannot also overlook that 80% of its economy is dependent on services. Because of lockdown, there has been very bad hit taken on the tourism and hospitality industry, about civil aviation. So Britain cannot absorb the loss of this 80%, which has shrunk even very badly, almost totally. Businesses are being destroyed. And of course, some British companies have coped with the problems a little better, and small and medium scale industries and entrepreneurs have said that multinational corporations or large companies might survive, absorb the shock, but small companies will go out of business almost totally. This also has brought about the issue of dormant racial prejudice. There have been lots of arrogant statements not only by Johnson but by his ministers, by his Home Secretary, and there has been a conflict between Home Department and the Department of Industrial Development. And can Britain play a role in international affairs if it doesn't have economic clout? Then of course another part of Britain's economy depends on arms sales. Now Britain has always skated on thin ice. Out of 100 odd countries which are on the list of countries to whom lethal arms should not be sold because they have regularly, chronically committed human rights violations, Britain supplies arms to most of them, to tyrants and dictators in Africa, to Saudi Arabia, and this has caused problems. Now, British can claim that they have never broken the law, but they may not have broken the law, but their arms dealing is again going to be a little more problematic post-Brexit, because now the European Union member states, who now have a rivalry of arms trade in the rest of the world, not necessarily in the countries which are banned, they might be following policies which might be more in line with their moral stance on human rights, and there would be a possibility of conflict with Britain along this way also. So if we look at all these things, 3-4 things are worth remembering. That A, what Boris Johnson promised was actually not based on any substantial guarantees which he had received from European Union. There was unnecessarily drama built up towards getting an agreement and boost his image in the last minute. Although he had always said that no exit Brexit would have been, no deal Brexit would have been better than disadvantageous deal for Britain. But when he came back after the deal, he would say that this deal has given Britain whatever it wanted, but within the first month after the deal, there are so many bottlenecks, there are so many obstacles, there is so many grumblings, there is so much hit on an employment situation that the Trade Secretary, as we said, is assuring his people that wait for 10 years, let's not worry about the next year, 2 or 3. But in politics, weeks are too long a time. Years nobody believes, and this government has lost its credibility not once but repeatedly. Senior civil servants have retired, so the Brexit is going to have sad impact on the country's economy and its politics. It will remain turbulent. Let's look at the other way around. How does it impact on Indian interests? Now, Indians at one stage thought that if Britain moves out of the European Union, it would create space for India to move in But then you see the complementarities, the geographical proximity, the history of past 45, 47 years when Britain has been a member of the European Union is not going to be countervailed by India's efforts to claim this role. And India again would have to restructure its relationship. It has a very great trade deficit with China. It still, although it has a military standoff with China in the Himalayan snowy freezing deserts, but it cannot disentangle or disengage, to use former American President's phrase, from China. So our dependence for our economic wealth, economic health, economic growth depends on a certain kind of a cooperation besides rivalry, competition with China, and we probably cannot do that very easily. India would have to balance its relationship with Russia, with China, with America, with European Union before it can say that Britain has the same role or even a more important role than the pre-Brexit days in our international relations. When we turn to the European Union, it becomes clear that its troubles are not restricted to Britain or Brexit. It is a major problem for the European Union, but the European Union is confronted with major challenges other than Brexit also. It has been gathering in disarray for quite some time. It expanded very fast. It included lots of countries from Baltic region, from Eastern European region, and thought that like the unification of Germany had made it convenient and easy for the two Germanys to get back to the European family of nations, the other countries would also overcome the trauma of Cold War, the oppression of the Soviet and Russian rule over them, and join willingly and follow the lead given in terms of human rights, in terms of democratic progress, in terms of economic organization by the major players in the European Union, namely France and Germany. That is one part. This hope has been belied. This hope has been belied because you have countries in belonging to the erstwhile Soviet Empire, countries like Romania, countries like Czech Republic, countries like Slovenia, but more strongly countries like Poland and Hungary, who believe that their membership of the European Union is advantageous to them as long as they are bailed out of economic distress, as long as economic aid comes to them, as long as they are given one country, one vote parity with larger countries like France and Germany, but they refuse and obstinately resist the extension of either any democratization or acceptance of political dissent or freedom of expression or the rights of LGBT community or economic reorganization. They insist that these are internal matters. Now you cannot have a member state which insists on sanctity of its internal affairs and non-interference by other member states, not even to advise them, but seek equality in rights of voting or claim to decide which way the policy should take place. So European Union had certain criterion for membership like human rights, like environment, like democratic norms, and it had refused entry to countries like Turkey, which at one stage it thought did not fulfill these requirements. Now European Union, especially the leaders like France and Germany, have a major problem coping with this. Taking advantage of this disarray, Putin in Russia has tried to either lure, entice or browbeat the countries which are part of the Soviet Empire and were in its orbit, countries in Baltic, Lithuania, Estonia, etc. Now the interesting thing is that political turmoil in Belarus has spilled over to Estonia, Lithuania, etc. Now what happens is that these countries, how long will they remain stable when they are, shall we say for the lack of a better word, harboring political refugees or asylum seekers or dissenters from the erstwhile East European countries. Now Hungary and Poland have had elections which have thrown back more authoritarian, more, shall we say, conformist communist leaders to power. So there are some who make populist noises, but these countries are a problem for European Union. Another set of problems is posed for European Union by what was conveniently called the pigs, countries which do chronically badly economically like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, and they put a burden on more economically affluent, powerful member states, and they are perpetually what they call basket cases. They have political instability, they have economic mismanagement, there are charges of corruption, the interface between organized crime and electoral politics, and this has also created a problem, particularly after the COVID for the European Union. Many of these countries in the southern Europe depended on their economic welfare, on tourism, services, which are gone for a toss since the COVID. Another set of problems is posed by the Scandinavian countries in the northern Europe, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Helsinki, Finland, that is, the capital is Helsinki, are countries which keep aloof from whatever is happening in the rest of Europe. They would like to have advantage of membership. They are countries with very high degree of affluence, limited areas of specialization but high technological competence. They share the concerns of European Union about climate change, which affects them more directly. They are countries which would like to retain a neutral position, and at times Austria joins them. These countries are more frugal. They don't like the idea of France and Germany bailing out the less enterprising, the less energetic members of the European Union. There has been in recent past a slight resurgence, like in Germany, of the neo-Nazi, racist, ultra-right trying to influence political decisions against the refugees, which are non-whites, which are non-Christians, and there have been unpleasant incidents of violence in these countries. So this again is countries remaining aloof, the North European ones, East European ones in a belligerent, assertive mood, the poorer countries of European Union not doing too well despite repeated bailouts, and this is leaving France and Germany slightly impatient. There also have been issues of unruly behavior in countries which are in the heart of Europe, like Holland, where in Amsterdam, people came out defying the curfew that was imposed to contain the COVID infections. They burnt cars, there were cases of loot and arson, and they said, we have never been in a curfew after the Second World War was over. So why should we comply with these rules? And they are even much worse than the assertions of individual freedoms and liberties in American cities which we witnessed, which nullified the spreading containment of the COVID virus. So this is there also. Now France and Germany have problems of their own. In France, President Macron is facing the challenge of Islamic dogmatism, Islamic terrorism, and President Macron in France has to face a re-election in a year and a half's time. And it is not unnatural for him to be concerned about the challenge of Islamic terrorism in his country. There have been rise in incidents of terrorist violence, sporadic lone wolf attacks, but they have also, the investigators have found a larger conspiracy of separatist refugees who have taken asylum in France to use the freedom of expression and peaceful assembly and democratic ways of life to their advantage, subverting the French ideals. President Macron is very clear that there is equality and certain freedom of expression is the essence of French way of life, but it cannot be allowed to be abused. Religion and state have been separate since Napoleon's time in France, and this is what has created a little controversy, that some people in France who are leftists, who do not support the economic policies of Macron, have started criticizing him that he is not allowing the freedom of expression, which is the soul of the French democracy, to be exercised equally by refugees and those who have sought asylum. Now, the new law which is proposed to contain separatism has come under heavy criticism. It will be some time before we know, before it will have an easy passage, or it will be contested in the parliament before it becomes law. But the fact remains that France has to worry about one more thing. France is trying to increase its footprint in Africa to prove the point that it is once again a major power in international relations. There are more than 5,000 French soldiers maintaining peace in Sahel region, in Central Africa, and his decision to withdraw them has immediately been met with the protests by Africans themselves, who believe that the French have tried to cut down human rights violations wherever they are present. But there is a loss of French soldiers' lives, and this creates a criticism for Macron in France that is it worthwhile to have this presence only for prestige reasons? Can France afford to do this? In terms of economics, does it really serve any national interest at all? Or it is just one of posturing on the stage, as he did when there was a blast in Lebanon, and which was an erstwhile French colonial territory. When he went there, people said, oh, we want France to take us back in its fold. But these things are momentary emotional outbursts. They do not really correlate with the genuine national interests of a country. In Germany, Angela Merkel's successor has been more or less decided, but we do not know whether he would be as resilient, as successful, as popular, as diplomatic as Ms. Merkel has been in looking after not only the German interests, but carrying the rest of the European Union members with his decisions or with joint decisions undertaken with France. The European Union has also signed a very interesting agreement with People's Republic of China for long-term investment, and although the European Union insists that it has registered its protests about the mistreatment of Uyghur Muslims by China in Xinjiang, it has protested against the crushing of the democratic movement in Hong Kong, but the Chinese have also made it equally clear that these are internal affairs of China. Nobody should express or interfere opinion or interfere in these affairs, and China realizes under Xi that it has made the dependence of other nations so heavy on its supplies, so their own supply chains are disturbed if they boycott China. So even the Huawei, which was suspect number one as a company having close ties with Chinese state or security apparatus, once more lying low, has a low profile, but nobody is talking of boycotting it. At the same time, one must keep in mind the relationship of European Union in future with Russia. Putin has again come out with a bullying statement that Russia doesn't want to live alone. It wants to live in harmony with other nations. But if need be, it will go alone. It will follow a path all alone and look after its national interest. But European Union is dependent on Russian gas and oil to a large extent, so it just cannot wish away Russia. So the American sanctions on Russia may be relaxed a little under the Biden, but it doesn't mean that European Union will follow the path which coincides with American diplomacy in Russia. There are other issues about Iran, Iran's rehabilitation in the nuclear thing, about the environmental concerns of the rest of the world. So European Union will probably stay the course on these two, but economy in Germany is doing quite well compared to the other nations hit by that, but nobody can predict how the future turbulence might hit it. So India has to be cautious about maintaining its relationship with major nations, bilateral relationships in the European Union, and evaluating the significance of European Union's impact on international relations in coming days. That is all we have for you this week. We'll meet again next week with the review of international affairs, and this time it will be our turn to have a close look at the continent of Africa and the continent of Latin America, Southern America, both very much an integral part of the third world, large concentration of developing nations, full of resources, full of political turmoil, and unfortunately suffering exploitation and violence almost chronically. Countries like Brazil have been hit very bad by COVID. Africa, nobody knows how badly it is hit, and Ebola is raising its head. But all that for the next week, and then we shall be in a position to take a composite look and evaluate how the relationship, how the architecture of the post-COVID world is going to emerge. Till then, goodbye and thank you.